Thanks for joining. We're here to talk about the Youth Climate Action Grant. So this is an info session that we're having today. I'm also going to be recording this. So if you have to leave or if you know someone who wanted to join but couldn't make it, I will be posting this on the Youth Climate Action Grant website. So you can check it out there and share it with folks if you need to. All right, so before we dive in, I do want to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with Mississaugas of the Credit. All right, so I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Tara. I'm the project lead for the Youth Climate Action Grants. You may have met me in a previous role that I had with the Pollinate TO program. So I used to be the project lead for that. And maybe even you met me when I was project lead for the Urban Forestry Grants and Incentives program. So now I'm with Youth Climate Action Grants. So you will be speaking with me a lot if you do end up applying for a grant. I do like talking about the grants, so feel free to contact me whenever you need to. All right, so let's start with the impetus behind the Youth Climate Action Grant. So in 2021, Toronto City Council adopted the Net Zero Transformed TO updated strategy that set new targets for reaching net zero citywide emissions by 2040, which is a response to the climate emergency the City Council declared in 2019. So part of the strategy was engaging youth, school boards, and other stakeholders in creating the strategy and seeing what mattered to Torontonians. Youth involvement was recognized as being critical to the design and implementation of the net zero strategy, both from an equity perspective, but also because the strategy really would benefit from youth innovative thinking and contributions. So to reach our net zero goals, we need to change the way we move and heat and operate our buildings and how we produce waste. Transform TO includes specific short-term targets that each of these sectors must meet. So here's just like an example of what we're aiming to do by 2040. Students and teachers and schools can help Toronto meet our net zero goals. Schools and students specifically can play a really big part in fostering sustainable transportation, like biking to school or more walking, taking public transit. Students can help us reduce waste. And more importantly, students also can share their knowledge and how to create climate action with their siblings, parents, family, and friends, and create meaningful impact beyond the classroom. So getting students involved is going to really help us reach these goals. So we'll take a really quick look at where Toronto's emissions are coming from. If you look at this pie chart, you can see that most of it is coming from buildings, 56%. And of that 56%, most of that is coming from single family homes for like space heating or water heating. After buildings, most emissions are coming from transportation. Most of that's actually from single passenger vehicles, not like, say, public transportation or transport vehicles, things like that. And then the last 9% of emissions is from waste. Most of that is from landfill. There's a small percentage of that 9% that is from organic and yard waste processing and water treatment, wastewater treatment processing, but the most of it is from landfill emissions. So that's the biggest one there. All right, so the Youth Climate Action Grants, they were launched in 2022, and they're currently open to Toronto District School Board and Toronto Catholic District School Boards schools. You can apply for up to $1,000 per project. The projects need to be student-led, and they have projects, activities, events that help Toronto achieve its greenhouse gas emission goals. And to date, we've funded 87 projects at 70 schools. All right, so let's take a quick look at who can apply. So we're looking at student-led groups. We've had in the past classroom projects, like a lot of science classes, art classes, but obviously any class is welcome to submit an application. Student groups that partner with parent councils, school clubs and teams, student-teacher collaborations, student councils. So we really strongly encourage students to actually submit an application, which I know can be a little intimidating, but when we do get them, it's very exciting. Applications do have to have a staff member serve as the project supervisor, and they do have to have permission from the school principal to carry out their project. All right, and projects that are eligible are those that are created and delivered by students, help reduce greenhouse gas emissions in Toronto, and also educate and engage students, families, and community members on climate change and climate actions that they can take. So those are the three main things that we're looking for with projects. Especially, people tend to forget that engagement piece with outside the school community. We do look for stuff like that. All right, so here's just some examples of projects that we have funded previously. For example, we've gotten a lot of food gardens and promoting local foods, reducing food waste, cycling and low carbon transportation promotion, eliminating single use and takeaway plastics and items, the 3 Rs, reduce, reuse, and recycle, sharing and repairing. So it can either be like we've had a lot of textile repair workshops, things like that. And then just climate change learnings, things like that. As a note, if you have previously applied for a Youth Climate Action Grant, you are more than welcome to apply again. However, you need to make it a new project. You can't just basically copy paste what you had used previously. We need to see like some innovation and some changes. We can't fund the same project over and over again, basically. So just keep that in mind if you're coming back from like a previous year to apply again. All right, so one of the greatest ways, and I've touched on this, is students can help Toronto reach its greenhouse gas emission goals is by sharing their knowledge and promoting climate actions in their wider communities. So we'd strongly encourage you to think and get your students to think about that piece of their project, how they're going to do outreach to fellow students, the school, to their families, to their community. How are they going to involve the wider community and neighborhood into their project? So here's just a few examples of community engagement pieces that students and projects have taken place in the past. So for example, demonstrations and workshops, either in person or online, community planting and maintenance days, having dedicated social media or like a web presence, toolkits and how-to guides, lesson plans so they can share with other classes and other schools, seed sharing and plant giveaways. Like if you're growing extra stuff, having like a plant swap day is a great idea. Citizen science projects, so things like bird watches, bio blitzes, things like that, that can take place at the school, but can also take place at home in your neighborhood. Community bike trains and rodeos we've had in the past, and then secondhand swaps and free markets. So like used clothing, use reusable items like water bottles, things like that. We've had a bunch of different things. So those are just some examples that you might want to consider. All right, let's talk about key steps and timelines for the grant application process. So the Youth Climate Action Grants are actually a two-step process. So right now we're in step one, which is submitting a request for funding application. It's open right now and it's open until the end of the month. So I'll just go quickly over to that page. So this is the Youth Climate Action Grants page. And if you want to check out the request for funding application, you can click here, submit an application. You can go to key dates, hit the supply button. There's, I think, where is it? In application process, there's another button here. Anyway, so first step is you're going to submit this request for funding application. It is super short, shouldn't take more than 10 minutes. Basically, you're telling us which school board you're with, school information, who you are, what kind of group you are, and then really briefly, what's your project? Like just a short and simple, like, hey, my class wants to do this, or my group wants to do this. This is our plan. This is how we plan to engage. Short and simple, what activities you're going to do. And that's it. That's the first step. So once that's submitted, you're going to get feedback about your project from City of Toronto staff, and also school board staff are going to look over your project as well, just to make sure it's eligible one with school rules, and give any feedback how they think maybe that you should tweak your idea. So once you get that feedback from us, I will then send you a link to the full grant application, and that is due November 28th. So the full grant application is a little bit more involved because you're going to need to tell us how you plan to do your project. You're going to need to submit a work plan. Doesn't have to be crazy detailed, but we do need an idea of like January, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do outreach, and like who's going to do it kind of thing. So there's a work plan and there's also a budget involved. And I will talk more about the budget in a couple slides just to give you some information and tips on that. So after you submit your full grant proposal, it's going to go to the full grant proposal review process. That's going to take place in December. And once again, it's city staff that are doing that, and also school board staff that are overlooking that. So we're going to review it, make sure it's feasible, make sure it's in alignment with teaching goals with the school boards, and that your budget makes sense, things like that. Your project will get approved, and then you can go ahead and go on with your project. So here's a quick key dates. All right, so requests for funding applications are open right now. They're open until next Friday, so October 31st at midnight. So get them in before then. Like I said, super short and quick, should take you 10 minutes. If your project is approved to move to the full application stage, I will send you a link with some feedback if necessary. And the full grant proposal is due November 28th. That is the last Friday in November. In December, we're going to be reviewing those full applications. In January, if you were successful, you'll hear back from us with project approval. And then February to June 2026 is when you will implement your projects. And then in June, you will have to submit a final report once your project is complete. You'll notice there's a little asterisk here. I am saying June 2026, and priority is given to projects that are going to be completed by the end of the school year. However, if your project is going to go beyond that into like the next school year, we will consider that as well. So don't worry too much if you think it's going to be a longer term project. All right, so for the first stage application, you do not need to submit a budget, but you do need to submit a budget for the full application. So I do encourage folks to start thinking about that ahead of time, just so they're not caught off guard. So things to look out for when you're creating a budget is you want to research your items to accurately estimate cost, especially if you've got any like big ticket items. We want to have like an accurate estimate of what that is, not like a ballpark, especially if it's going to make up the bulk of your budget. Make sure the items that you're suggesting in your budget are eligible, not just in terms of are they eligible from a City of Toronto standpoint, but also are they eligible from a school board standpoint. There's a lot of things that, for example, like the school board specifically don't want on school property. For example, the TDSB won't do composters. So if you were thinking about getting a composter outside, just forget it because they don't want it. On the Youth Climate Action Grants website, we do have a tab that has like a list of eligible and ineligible items. So you can go there and search for a particular item if you're curious. If you don't see something on that list, feel free to reach out to me directly and we can discuss. And then just a reminder, the maximum amount of funding a group can request is $1,000. All right, so this is a really quick example of some eligible expenses that you can request in that budget once you go to the full application. So, basic stuff like project supplies, like paper, pens, paint, raw materials, like if you're building a garden, like wood and screws, soil, renting or purchasing small equipment, event promotion communication, space rental, skilled labor, food and refreshments, honoraria for volunteer services. You'll notice that these last three items have a little asterisk, up to 25% of total grant requests. So if you are, having someone come in to teach, perhaps you're having like Indigenous knowledge leaders come in to have a discussion with your class and you want to pay an honoraria, it can only go up to 25% of the total grant request. So if you're requesting $1,000, so the full amount of the grant request, you can only have honoraria paid out to $250. So just keep that in mind. Like I mentioned, please visit our Youth Climate Action Grant website for a bigger list of eligible and ineligible costs, and reach out to us if you don't see what you're looking for. And then on the note of honoraria, guest speakers, things like that, and workshop facilitators, I really strongly encourage you to reach out well ahead of time if you have a particular organization or workshop leader or person that you want to be part of this project and present or lead a workshop, even before you get to the next stage, honestly, because I've had folks tell me in the past that that was their biggest hang up, was that the person that they wanted to lead a workshop or do a presentation for their class or their project was already fully booked by the time they got full approval from this project. So I would say, make some tentative inroads now if you have somebody in mind, and save yourself the heartache of them being already fully booked by the time everything has been processed and you've been approved for a grant. So that is my suggestion. All right, so we're going to talk really quickly about some past projects just to get you excited. I am currently working on updating the Youth Climate Action Grants webpage to include project descriptions for all of our past projects. So in the next day or so, I should have that up and running. So you can also go there for some inspiration and ideas as well. Okay, so this picture is from St. John Paul Catholic Secondary School, and they did a community garden. So students planted seeds and tended the plants. They promoted growing food as climate action by creating signage and posters for both the garden and to display throughout the school to involve other students. And they brought the community in over the summer to help care for the garden when school was out. So that was like a really good way of getting folks from students' homes, from the wider neighborhood and community involved in the project. And here we have Loretto Abbey. They did a repair cafe. So students established a repair cafe where students could drop in for basic repairs and alterations to clothing that they own. Students learned about fast fashion and how it contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. They learned about upcycling clothing and textiles, turning them into new clothes, for example, or turning them into entirely new items. Like I think they made some scrunchies and they made some bags, things like that, when the textiles or the clothing that they had were basically beyond repair. But yeah, this is a way of keeping it out of landfills. And then part of that was not only just coming in and having stuff repaired, but the students also learned basic sewing skills. So like sewing patches, replacing buttons, darning socks and hems, things like that. Bloor Collegiate Institute, they had a really impressive project. So they built a miniature wind turbine from scratch to gain practical understanding of how wind energy works and exposed to how engineering can be used for the good of society. Students presented this project and taught 9 other classes in their school about climate change, renewable energy, and also how they assembled their wind turbine. I believe that the wind turbine now lives on school campus as like an example to other students after this class went through. And then lastly, we have Ogden Junior Public School. They did a pretty big community planting day event. So students grew native plants and learned about growing food locally in small spaces. Student ambassadors taught about reducing the effects of climate change through growing their own food. They had workshops for students and parents about soil and tree care, how to amend soil to support trees, how to prevent soil erosion. Um, they started a school leadership opportunity for students to water and care for trees on campus. And they also taught the community about invasive species and how to care for trees in their own yards. And part of this day is they also did plant swaps. So people could bring their own plants and swap it for plants that the students had grown. They taught about sprouting from seeds and how to make pots. So really impressive project. All right, so I showed you our Youth Climate Action webpage. Everything you need to know is pretty much here. So do take a second to come visit. We've got key dates, when things are due, who can apply, who can't apply, eligible projects, some examples, ineligible projects, eligible costs. So we have like this table here. You can search in it for specific things like cameras, for example, and then we have ineligible items, same thing. You can search in here for things. Once again, you don't find something, just give me a call or an email. All my contact information is right there. We have reporting requirements, but you don't need to worry about that right now. That's a future problem, not a problem. It's a future requirement. Grant rules, and then right now, like I mentioned, I am currently updating this grant recipients tab. In the next day or so, I will have some descriptions of what those projects actually were, so you can come here and learn about what projects were funded in the past. Excuse me. Alrighty. And that is it. Thank you very much for attending. Here's my contact information again. You can also find it on our Youth Climate Action Grants website if you don't want to take this down now. Yeah, that's it. I hope that was informative and I really hope you apply. If you have any questions, please let me know now. You can put it in the chat. Or if you don't have any particular questions right now and you think of something later on, just shoot me an email.